My final area for canvassing is with respect to the Sexualized Violence and Misconduct Policy Act that was brought in under the previous government. Under the Act, the Minister can direct a post-secondary institution to conduct a survey or to review its sexual misconduct policy in order to determine its effectiveness. We're aware that a survey was actually done on the effectiveness of this legislation and post-secondary policies. So my question is, a number of questions here is, are there plans for a more substantial review of these policies in the future? And if yes, what is the timeline for that?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I thank the member opposite for the question. I first want to acknowledge his advocacy. I want to acknowledge the former government's efforts to put a law into place. I want to acknowledge that these steps will lead, hopefully, to better safety and outcomes for people. Most of the institutions formalized their policies in 2017, and as the legislation requires institutions to review their policies every 3 years, whether the minister directs it or not. Most institutions will be undertaking reviews prior to May 2020. These reviews are required to include student consultation. Institutions are responsible for the review of their policies and determining what amendments or additions may be needed to best meet the needs of their students and campuses. Further to this survey that was undertaken by the ministry as part of an outreach engagement campaign in the winter of 2017-2018 after reform government, a working group comprised of students, institution staff, and a community organization resource was convened in December 2018. The working group reviewed the feedback received and provided input to the development of a draft action plan for the minister's consideration. Review of institution policies was an area considered by the working group. We will be working closely with the institutions over the next several months to further explore next steps. I can assure the member opposite that recommendations are being drafted as we speak, and I'm anxiously awaiting what the students in the working group has had to say. And we as a government are committed to moving forward to ensure that we address student safety on campus.
Okay, a member, and noting the hour.
I must note the hour, Honourable Chair, so I would suggest that perhaps is it appropriate for the Minister to note such said hour, and I'll take my place and allow.
No, I go ahead with your question.
Oh,
just that this will likely be the last question.
Okay, so I will make a comment. I appreciate the answer for the Minister. Of course, different institutions have a different capacity to actually introduce and enable these sexualized violence and misconduct policies. Some institutions have been more successful than others. I've also undertaken an attempt to receive feedback from various institutions across, particularly student groups, the province, and there is differing, varied implementation, and I certainly look forward to the recommendations coming forward from that group, because there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Of course, as the Minister will know, that institutions do not want sexualized violence issues to be public, because institutions want to be branded as safe institutions for their student body. So there's an inherent process, an inherent desire to keep this under the radar, so to speak, and one of the purposes of introducing the policy measures last time was to ensure that institutions grapple with the very real problem that's ongoing. So I look forward to the results. In September, the Ministry began an information campaign. This campaign featured posters that implied that rape culture is wrong. These posters, however, were not very informative. Students need information about the supports that are available to them. So I had a series of questions here. I can just toss them all out at the same time, because the Minister should have received these in advance. Who did the Ministry consult in the design of these posters? Will this information campaign be continuing next year? Will there be a substantive review of the effectiveness of this campaign? And how will the Ministry incorporate support resource information into the posts going forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you for raising the important issue that if we're talking about making systemic change, we have a law. The law led to policies. The policies, when I came on as Minister, were found on some websites, if you had a password or not. And I'm not trying to be critical, but I didn't think it was good enough to have policies on a website that mean nothing to students. We wanted to reach out to students who told me as minister when I visited all of the campuses that this was a serious issue. And it's one that takes great courage for people to come forward to say, I've been a victim. Regardless of who you are, I'm not telling you what the face is. And that was the point of the campaign. The campaign was, we don't know what that face is, and let's not generalize. Let's not stereotype that it's a guy or a girl. Part of the idea of Tinder, I'm not familiar with Tinder, I'm married for those of you watching at home. Tinder, you know, swipe right, swipe left, that was the idea. The idea was trying to capture a younger audience. I'm not 22, I'm not going to university anymore, but we know that young people are on their phones, and that we wanted a campaign that was going to be somewhat provocative. I heard from students who said, hey, we weren't really expecting this from the minister. It was a step. It was a step in a strategy that we're doing. We have a working group who has given us a lot as a ministry of suggestion, recommendation, and advice on what we should do to address this very, very serious issue. But when it comes time to the campaign was timed to meet the highest points of risk the first 2 weeks of school. We launched the campaign again in January with the highest points of risk in school. I can't answer your question on whether or not we will relaunch the same campaign. I'm taking direction and advice from the students who have taken their time to tell me how we should address the systemic issue. And there will be more to come, but that was in essence the premise of how we came up with the campaign. And was it enough? We wanted a campaign that could speak for itself, and part of it was to get people talking.